Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My apologies for missing out on a video last week, but you know, sometimes we have these occasions when we get distracted by other things happening in our life. That's quite normal, quite healthy. So anyway, I'm going to be talking today regarding a different stage in my life, as promised. I'll be sharing my story with you as if what was happening at that particular stage in my life. And I'm assuming it was around the age of between 12 and 15 years old. Again, I've made a few notes as reminders, so I will keep looking down to remind myself what I'm talking about, because I don't want to be having too many gaps, you know, where you're thinking what happened next, because in the beginning when I started doing my YouTubes, I missed parts of my life out, and I want to make sure that, you know, I share with you certain things, certain aspects that happened in my life, you know, for the purpose of reaching out to people that have been through similar instances in their life. So anyway, what I'm going to be talking about this week is what happened in particular between the ages of 12 and 14. There is another area that I will be talking about later on, when I was around 18 years old. That was to do with some other sexual abuse that happened to me. But because I'm progressing through my life from age to age, this week I'll be talking about what happened at home with my mother and myself and my brothers and sisters. So my sister had left home, as family members do when things progress in their life and they meet someone and they go and set up home together. So now I'm the oldest in the house basically, and I'm kind of like being the main person that's looking after my siblings, brothers and sisters, etc. So I'm going to talk about problems that I had at home. And basically I'm going to talk about school. I hated school. I hated school because I was illiterate. I come from a very poor family. We were very poor. You know, we hadn't got a father because he'd been, you know, sadly taken from us when I was 5 years old. Also, I wet the bed terribly. I wet the bed really, really bad every single night. And because we were quite poor, we would sometimes go to school in maybe, as I mentioned in one of my earlier YouTubes, that all I ever slept in was sometimes a vest, sometimes a pants, sometimes vest and pants. And sometimes I'd have to go to school in the vest that I'd obviously wet the bed, because obviously, you know, we only bathed about once a week. That was the thing back then. Our bath was outside, hanging on the wall outside the back door. So, you know, you'd only want to get that in once a week, and you'd all share the same water, one out, one in sort of thing. It's very funny, but that was the thing back then. And we didn't have any facilities for hot and cold tap. We just had a cold tap, so you just made do. Sometimes I would stay awake all night so that I didn't wet the bed. I hated it. I hated it when I woke up in the morning, because I knew that my mum would be angry and I didn't want to disappoint her. You know, I was craving to be loved and liked, and obviously I knew how my mum felt when she saw my bed in the morning. Sometimes I'd do everything in my willpower to hide the fact that I'd wet the bed, or I'd sometimes stay awake all night long so that I didn't wet the bed, and my mum would be happy with me. But I remember one day when my mother got so angry and humiliated me, and I think in her mind she thought it'd help me to not wet the bed again and it'd cure my problem. I suppose really she tried everything to stop me from wetting the bed. I mean, you know, when you've got a couple of children that are wetting the bed and they're wetting the bed continuously every night, it must cause a lot of problems because you're constantly washing. And you know, back then you didn't have the facilities to wash everything every day. It'd be a tub outside with a mandle. It wasn't like, you know, nowadays you get automatic washing machines, etc. Or, you know, when I was married, we'd have a twin tub which washed and then you'd put it all in the dryer, as many people could relate to. You put your washer on, do your washing, and then when that stopped, you'd put it over to your dryer, you'd spin it, and then you'd spray it with a hose type thing to rinse it, and then you'd spin it again, then you'd rinse it again, and then you'd... That's how it was back then. But now we've got washing machines, haven't we? So it's a lot easier now. So back then it did cause a lot of problem and a lot of hard work and a lot of heartache for me, and a lot of heartache for parents, I suppose. But I remember one particular day when my mum humiliated me, and my mates used to come and call for me, and they'd stand outside the back door, which was just under my bedroom window. We had those old sash cord windows where you would just shove them up and let the air in, or, you know, to freshen the bedrooms up, and you could sometimes chuck your washing out there and it'd land by the kitchen door. But my mates would be waiting for me. And on this particular morning, my mum walked into the bedroom, and I think I must have been in the garden talking to my mates. I'd got the back door open and I was talking to my mates, and they'd called for me in the hopes I'd go out to play, but I wasn't yet ready. And my mum had entered my bedroom and she'd seen that I'd wet the bed and opened the window, and she was screaming and shouting at me about my bed wetting, shouting her head off in fact. And she opened the window and threw my wet bedding out the window, where it immediately landed in front of my friend. Oh my God. It was so embarrassing. It was so degrading. It was awful. I felt so humiliated. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't stay over anywhere in case I wet the bed. If I did go and stay at a friend's house, I'd stay awake all night in case I wet the bed. And, you know, as I said earlier, sometimes I'd stay awake all night in the hopes of not wetting the bed, so my mum wouldn't have a go at me, or she didn't embarrass me, or... It just reinforced how I felt about myself, I suppose. I mean, my younger brother, he was the next one down from me. He wet the bed as well. And he used to continuously wet the bed just like I did. And he used to get told off a lot by mum. Sometimes we'd be sharing the same bed, and you can imagine the mess in the bed. I remember on one particular morning, I mean, there is a funny side to this story, but also it was a very dangerous thing that my brother did. He wanted to impress mum also. So there was one particular day I ended up in my mum's room. My brother proudly came walking in one morning. He'd got nothing on from the waist downways, and or should I say downwards, and he had this little red bow. I think he'd tied the end of his penis with a bit of either ribbon or knitting wool or something like that. I remember it was red, and he'd got that tied on the end. And he said, "Look, Mum, look what I did. I didn't wet the bed." So happy with himself, thinking that he'd really pleased Mum. Oh my God, this was terrible. This was terrible. My mother went mad. She went crazy, told him to take it off now because he could have done himself some danger, he could have caused himself a lot of problems. And he thought he was doing the right thing by doing that, but obviously Mum wasn't very impressed at all. She was angry with him. And he immediately removed it and then went downstairs to the toilet outside because that was at the end of the garden. But she did have a little chuckle to herself. We all did, really. Once I saw my mum laughing, I thought, oh my God, she's laughing at there. It was funny seeing this little red bow on the end of his little winky, if you want to call it that. So that was very dangerous, and please, anyone out there listening, do not attempt things like that because it's very wrong, very dangerous, very, very dangerous. But these were the lengths that we'd go to prevent wetting the bed. She did see the funny side of it. The next few years was difficult because obviously, I'm the older one, and as I say, I'm about between 12, 13, 14, 15, and obviously I'm doing all the cleaning in the house, all the shopping and whatnot. It was a very emotional time because obviously my mum used to still continue going to the pub, which was immediately inside our street at the very top, so she was quite nearby. I suppose, she liked to drink because obviously it shut off all the emotional stress that she was going through at the time. It must have been difficult for her. I didn't really understand the impact of alcohol at that age because you wouldn't, would you? All I know is that when my mum came home at the end of the day when she'd been to the pub, she was always either happy, loving, or very, very emotional. Because you I suppose really you're kind of masking, and it's a short-term way of shutting out your emotions. This is something I will be discussing more on later on in my YouTubes. It had shut off your emotional problems to do with what was going on in your head, but it's only a short-term problem because it, after the alcohol's worn off, it had come back with a vengeance, or the emotional problems, all the emotional baggage that you've been through in your life. But I remember on one occasion my mother went to the pub, and for some unknown reason, I'm going through it now like it only happened yesterday because I can relive it in my head, but fortunately I'm able to cope with it because I've dealt with it all. But I remember when my mum, on one occasion, she went to the pub and I was in her bed sleeping, and my brothers and sisters were asleep in their rooms, and I don't really know why I was in my mum's bed. But I remember her coming in late one night. It must have been about, 10, 11 o'clock. And it was pitch black. We didn't have light bulbs. You had to feel your way around in our house because there was very rarely any light bulbs. My mother come up the stairs and I could hear her feeling her way up the stairs. I was in and out of sleep. And she came up to the bed and she leaned over and kissed me and said goodbye. And I said goodbye, Mum, and obviously I was half asleep, half awake, and I wasn't thinking straight. And she went down the stairs, and I think I must have dozed back off to sleep. But I must have woke up about 15, 20 minutes later. I'm not sure how long it was. And it was like one of those blinkered moments, when you suddenly wake up with a start. It's like, goodbye. Why goodbye and not good night? Instinctively, I jumped up. went running down the stairs. I don't know what made me do it. Something told me there was something not right. I went down the stairs and there she was. She'd got a cushion resting inside the oven. She'd taken all the shelves out and her head was resting on these cushions, and the gas was switched on. Back in those days, that sort of gas could kill you. And I immediately pulled her head out the oven. Well, first of all, I turned the gas off and I pulled her head out the oven. She then turned the gas back on and put her head back in the oven on this cushion. And I begged her not to. I said, please don't leave me, Mum. Please don't do this. I kept turning the gas off. She kept turning it on. I begged her. I was crying. The tears were streaming down my eyes. Please don't go. Please don't do this. Please don't leave me. I couldn't control the situation. It became very, very difficult for me to control. So I immediately ran in the street. Again, it was just an instinctive thing that people do. I ran into the street to get help because there was no one to help me. I ran in the street and grabbed the first person I could. Somebody immediately called an ambulance. They came in the house, took her out of the oven. I don't know if they laid her on the sofa. I don't know if they laid her on the floor. She was off, conscious. And the ambulance came. There was loads of people by then in my house. Loads of people outside the house. They took her away, and I was then left to, run the house, look after the kids. I mean, I must have been very shaken up, must have been very emotional, very scared. Back then, you see, they didn't really worry about you. They just left you to your own devices because, you're about 14, 15 years old. They just tell you to lock up. We're taking your mum now. We're going to take her to hospital. Don't worry, we'll sort this out. I mean, it's different nowadays. You'd get reported and social services would be on your back, but I don't really remember anyone coming out. My mum remained in hospital for a few days, and it was a very, very difficult time all round. We were all rallying round, trying, all the family trying to support each other. And back then, you see, if you attempted suicide, they'd just basically lock you up. You'd go into a mental institution. But because my mum had been through so much trauma to do with my dad being killed, and also the sexual abuse that I'd endured when I was younger, because of the stress my mum had been under, they allowed her to come home and not, put her in any mental institution, which was a release really, because God knows what would have happened if she'd have gone into a home or some hospital. And basically that's what happened to me, but that obviously messed my head up a lot with, all the many things that happened going on in my life. And one of the reasons why I'm sharing my story of every stage in my life is basically because there's a lot of people out there that have been through situations like mine, and they've had to shrug it off, they've had to bury it, and when you bury it, it doesn't stay buried. It comes out in other ways and shows itself, in various ways, in anger, in alcohol, in gambling, OCD, all sorts of ways. There's so many ways you can, mask these problems. And, some of us are able to go and see counsellors. Some of us aren't able to go and see counsellors because some of us are embarrassed. Some of us are shy. Some of us are so repressed we can't talk about it. And some of us just go through life for years and years and years, like I did, with every single problem there was, you know, piled up on top of each other. Because I come from a, you know, I had multiple issues, which wasn't my fault, you know, multiple problems with sexual abuse and losing my father at the age of 5 through someone else killing him, domestic violence, literacy, you know, it being illiterate, I couldn't read or write, you know, my education suffered, and becoming separated from my beautiful daughters, everything impacted on me physically and mentally. And you know, sometimes we end up in mental institutions ourselves because we can't cope, as I couldn't. How the hell I got through, I don't know. And what I want to share with you is, okay, it's fantastic if you can go and see a counsellor, numerous counsellors, and share your experiences with them. Now, when you go to see a counsellor, which I've done before in my past, I've gone to see psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., therapists. A lot of these counsellors, you do most of the talking. Now, they just prompt. They're not allowed to put words into your mouth. You have to bring it all out and open yourself when you feel able and ready. They can't pursue you and push you into talking. They can only prompt here and there. And this is why I want to share my story, because I want to kind of give you the heads up if I can. Because I never got that. It took me many years to sort my head out, if you like. Through counselling, but also through talking, by sharing my story, also reading books. I've got some amazing books that have really helped me. You know, I've done a lot of things in my life to better myself. Being around positive people helps. Being around negative people does not help one bit, because it sends you back to negativity. So basically, these are all things I'm going to share with you along the way, to help you move on in your life. You know, I have listened to a lot of YouTubes on sexual abuse. I've listened to a lot of YouTubes on domestic violence, but I want to share my story with a view to moving forward to help you deal with the physical and mental emotion that lives inside of you after you've been through domestic violence, after you've been through sexual abuse, after you've, you know, become separated from children for whatever reason, after you've lost a family member to suicide. You know, many people that have been through the similar experiences as I have wanted to take their life. I've wanted to take my life, if I'm honest. And I'm not proud and happy to be sharing that. I'm being totally honest from my heart. You know, when you're going through the trauma in your head that you live with as a child, you know, domestic violence, sexual abuse, becoming separated from children, losing a member of your family to suicide, you feel like you can't go on. You feel like you just can't take anymore. And I know there's people out there that have taken their lives because of other groups I'm in, and they talk to me. Fortunately, I'm not in that place anymore. I'm definitely not in that place anymore. You know, it's almost like I've, after losing my son to suicide, it was like I kind of developed this third eye, this spiritual third eye, if that makes any sense. It was like I'd, as I say, developed this third eye where I could look inside my life and see it for what it was. And I could make sense of it all. It gave me a completely different perspective that made me feel strong about myself and helped me to move on. I've got some amazing friends that give me lots of support. You know, a lot of people say, how could you, how could you share your life? I feel now that I've dealt with what happened to me as a child. I've dealt with the sexual abuse. I've dealt with the domestic violence. Sometimes I can talk about certain aspects of my past and all of a sudden I will break down, and because it reaches down inside of me and touches certain parts of me, because there are certain parts of me that still hurt from aspects of my life. Like, when I became separated from my daughters, if people talk to me about that or want me to share that with them, yes, I just break down. I just can't help, because the emotions are still there, very real. But I can cope with all the other stuff. There's so much I can cope with, and it doesn't matter now. It'll never go on. That memory is still there in my head, but I've dealt with all the tears, I've dealt with all the crying, I've dealt with all the anger. I've risen above that now, and I want to reach out to as many people as I possibly can that have been through sexual abuse, that have been through domestic violence, that has been through dysfunctional childhood issues, that have lost one of their parents due to someone killing them, or a road accident, or anything that that can have an impact on their life. I want to reach out, because I know sometimes it's hard. It's really hard for people to talk about it, but talking about it really does help. Changing your life patterns, the things that you do, not doing the things that distract you and distract you from the pain that's still there. Doing positive things instead, or dealing with the pain and working through it instead of around it. Sometimes I feel that I go on too much. But this is I'm really passionate about moving forward in my life. I'm really passionate about helping people. I've got so much in there that I want to give and help as many people as I possibly can. And I can only do that by sharing my story, and you people out there listening, subscribing, ringing that bell so people out there can listen to my story. There's people out there that's been through similar experiences as me, and they don't know a way forward. They're living a dysfunctional life and they want so much happiness in their life, and I want them to have that happiness too. So please subscribe, like, share. Thank you so much for listening. Next week we'll be talking about the next stage in my life, a little bit later on, maybe when I was about 17. Thank you so much for listening. Till next week. Bye bye for now. Take care.